I Want Tomorrow, Investigating Mental Health and Art, an exhibition that brings together the work of 8 artists to address the issue of mental health within the context of art and well-being. One of the main agenda of the exhibition is to erase the stigma around issues in mental health, particularly depression, anxiety, paranoia, bipolar disorder, autism, amongst the other more serious illnesses. We need to consider that mental health is just as important as a physical health. It might be invisible, but not unnoticeable. Hence, the show advocates speaking about these issues is the first step towards healing, and the works in the exhibition discuss various issues. How does one deal with personal grief, loss of a loved one, or a few months after retirement? What happens when the routine of decades comes to a halt, or the purpose of everydayness is disrupted? What if we no longer move from the memory of the past? Society and institutions we belong to pressurize us to conform, fit into a mold, remain silent, leaving us depressed and unfulfilled. We need to find a way to negotiate our silence. We no longer need to withdraw into a shell, recoil, but instead speak up and find an ecosystem that supports and nourishes us so that we can thrive to the best of our ability. The show advocates it's okay not to be okay. So this evening, I'm very excited to present Aparna Piramal Raje, who is the author of Working Out of the Box, 40 Stories of Leading CEOs. She's a regular columnist with Mint. She contributed to the UK's Weekend Financial Times, a global publication, for several years in the past. Over the past decade, she has fostered an awareness of design, especially workplace design in companies in India. Now, Aparna aspires to leverage her first-hand experience in India's mental health landscape to make a difference in this sector. Aparna has just launched a new book, Chemical Khichdi: How I Hacked My Mental Health, which is a personal story which is inspiring and motivating and attempts to remove some of the stigma associated with serious mental illnesses in an emphatic, accessible, and candid way. The book is structured in 3 parts. The first describes Aparna's mental health condition chronologically. The second outlines the 7 therapies that she has identified that have helped her navigate the bipolarity, how she has hacked, so to speak, her mental health. The third looks to the future therapies and presents concluding reflections on mental health. The book aspires to fulfill a very urgent need to add to the conversation on the subject of universal importance, and in doing so, it highlights how we as individuals, as families, and as communities can learn to thrive with vulnerabilities. Please join me in welcoming Aparna in her presentation, Healing for the Arts.
Thanks, Arya. Thanks so much for being here. I think, we have all forgotten many things pre-pandemic, but we have also not forgotten traffic. So I think especially many of us who've come from North India, I really, really appreciate it. It's really special. And I think I have actually thought of this subject even in my book. So what you're hearing today is actually a very different aspect, even which is not to say, so I'll just make the plug now before I forget about it, which is that, this is a birthday party without the cake. There's no cake and there's no return present because unfortunately there was a bit of a fire at Penguin and they had some production delays because of IT systems, so we don't actually have a copy of the book, but it is very much available on Amazon and my publicist is trying to hit a few numbers, so if you can contribute to that, if you haven't already, I would really appreciate that. So I'll talk really about healing through the arts, and again, as I said, it's really a privilege to think about this subject. The first thing I'll say is that the pandemic has been there for 2 years, but my pandemic has been with me 22 years. So this is what I've lived with since I was 24 years old. So I'll talk a little bit about the mental health journey, then creativity, and then the conclusion. And I'll start with a video. Even if the sound is not working, there's a caption, so you'll be able to see it. So really, the book, although it is very much about my my journey, it's really a book about mental health and wellness. And bipolar affects 1% of the population, or even if you multiply by that, all the people surrounded by it, it might be a small percentage. But mental wellness and mental health affects all of us. So in a way, the way I look at it is that if I can hack something as serious as bipolar, I think all of us living with conditions which are more common than that can actually be hacked. So I'll just tell you a little bit what bipolar is like for me. It's not that I'm sort of always manic or always depressed. There are times in which I think many people in this room, or perhaps a majority of people in this room, have seen me being, manic and unwell at times, maybe for a few weeks at a time. And then there are times when I've been really down, which can go on for a few months. But I'm normally, I think, quite what we would call normal, right? And Soumya's in this room, I think my oldest friend, my chaddi buddy, and she says, this is how I remember you, zany. And this was me before it all began, and I think at heart, this, I think of myself as wearing the only one with yellow sunglasses on business school campus. Uh, and this is where, I was 24 years old. I think we were outside HPS. And actually, I had my first trouble when I went to HPS. So that's when it started. I was very excited and stressed. And usually these triggers happen when there's a cocktail of emotions. There's usually a few things happening at the same time. And going to HBS, and there was some personal issues also at the same time. So there was a whole cocktail of different emotions, and that kind of takes me over to the edge. And that's when the manic episode happens. This is a picture I've never shared with anyone. The last time I was manic, Switzerland. And I wanted to share a lot of pictures because we are, after all, in an art gallery, so I wanted to keep it as visual as possible. And this is really a good depiction of what I'm like when I'm manic, because this is me being very sleep deprived. My face is kind of contorted. And you can see how much of an ally Radhika is to me. The person taking the picture was my other cousin sister, Nandini, also very much an ally. We were on a family ski trip, and I was really in my own world. And my world is so rich at that point that I have no recollection of what I'm actually saying to someone. And I might be a very difficult person, and I think a lot of my friends would say that at that time, but I just don't have recollection of what I've said because there's so much of an orchestra going inside me in my head. So this was the last time, and that was in 2018. Luckily, since then, there's been nothing like that, which is, what's allowed me to kind of write this book also. Depression for me is not about necessarily always just being in bed. It's just about being very quiet and withdrawn. And I think a lot of us who've gone through depression, anxiety, or things like that, you can actually still function, right? You can do your day-to-day work, you can go to school, you can go to college, you can do those things, and people don't really fully notice that you're depressed. And I love this picture of me with the boys. This was back in 2013, and they're there very much in the picture, and I'm interacting with them. It's not that but I'm also very sort of in my world of being withdrawn and quiet and just reading something even while they're kind of playing around, So I think that's just an example of how I would like us, when we think of these illnesses, to think of these pictures and not what we think of what we see in the media. And when we see, people tearing out their hair and, people kind of just sort of really looking very, very agitated, it's actually a lot more nuanced and subtle than that. So now coming to the arts, of course, many things have helped me heal, and the book is in fact about these 7 therapies that are all drawn from regular life. Everything that I've written in the book is something that any one of us can do. But I feel that the arts have particularly played a role when I think about it. So I'll talk about 10 different ways in which the arts have helped. So the first is the arts as contemplation, and I think we are here because we are reflecting on these works that we have in the gallery today. And I want to take you back to a time in December 2016 when I was feeling very hypomanic, and entirely by chance I came across a small Raza painting in a corner of the museum. It was subtle, contained, and beautiful, quite different from what the normal Raza works that you might see. And I wrote in my journal that it's an image I will hang in my mind to calm my thoughts and feelings and focus on inner stillness. And this was the work. And it was just small and contained, and it was subtle. And I felt like it was able to channel that energy that I needed. I had just too much energy, but the painting was able to absorb all of that. And of course, it's got the prayer, Satoma Sadgamaya, written at the bottom, which is in any case a very healing prayer. So that is one very, very beautiful aspect of the arts, where you have a lot of contemplation and stillness in everyday life. The arts are a muse. I'm not an artist, but ordinary objects become works of art when I'm manic. And these are, again, photos that I haven't shared, but, I don't know if my family saw me taking these, but I got fixated with these lights in our hotel, in our resort in Switzerland. And there are like dozens of these photographs of these same lights in my phone. And something like when I was, this was when I was hypomanic, and just something about the beauty of them or the angle of it, and this is not the only occasion it's happened. So it means that, everything around you comes alive. When you're in that hypomanic phase, I mean, it's no wonder that people start falling in love and having affairs and doing things like that, because everything comes alive. Even something like an inanimate object like a light, which you might see from different angles, just comes alive. Or it could be like colored towels that are just hanging on a street shop, and I just took so many photos of these because I just thought they were the most beautiful, brilliant thing at the time that I could see. So it's a different state of mind. And this is the thing that one has to really think about, because the arts is really also nasha, right? I think when you're being manic, I think the way I wrote this in the book, and this is, I think, one of my favorite lines in the book, really, is that every self-respecting manic episode has a music soundtrack to it. So anyone wants to guess what that soundtrack is? Any guesses over here? No guesses? This is what it is. So it's like, all of these tracks that are so energizing, so full of life. I'm not a Bollywood fan, really, but these are just tracks that I love. And I was doing this interview the other day with someone, and this guy at the other end who was saying, he's like, I like all these songs too. And I said, yeah, you're like a 24-year-old millennial. I'm a middle-aged mother of two, who's going around listening to Utta Punjab. So I think my rule now is that if I listen to them more than once or twice, then that's a red flag, okay? It's like, you better listen to like Desi Girl or something like that, okay? So you can't listen to these songs too often. These are the indication. The arts are equally the cocoon for me, very much so. So this is me on my swing at home, and I can spend hours in it, really. And I listen to a lot more things like, Mariah Carey, and those kind of, a lot of Sufi gospel and spiritual music, and so a lot of that kind of stuff when I'm trying to recover. And the other thing I think that people don't focus on enough is that when they look at mental health, there's a lot of talk on the phases of, when you're unwell, but the recovery phase is actually a phase which takes a long time. And to get back into the swing of things and to find those stabilizing rituals that help you to get back to the equilibrium can also take a long time. And so the swing is a big part of that, and the music is a big part of that. The arts as serenity, and this is something that I really tried to introduce actively into my life as an intervention to make sure that I stay sane. So this is the bedroom, and we had this work. I'll just show it you and describe it. So it's like this, it used to be a triptych, a double triptych, and very peaceful Zen landscape. And deliberately, Radhika's here, Radhika Desai, my creative soulmate, really. And she and I, we deliberately put that into the room to inject that sense of harmony and peace in it. And these were resuscitated paintings that I got from my dad's office. So there's that element of day-to-day serenity and equilibrium that you kind of have to create. And why that's important is because even the day-to-day is hard. Like today, you know, my older one did not get selected in cricket, and I was practically in tears. I was like, you know, I have to do this talk in the evening, but I was like devastated. I was really not very helpful to him, I think, in that moment, because I was, you know, empathizing with him so much that I thought I would just burst into tears alongside him. But so I think that, and I had to like literally reach out to Ankita over here and say, Ankita, I'm feeling terrible, you know, and she had to kind of cheer me up. So this is what I sort of have to do on a day-to-day basis, really. And the other part is then, of course, arts as therapy, and that goes without saying, but the journaling is just so important. Like, it's just really, really, really important. And I'll come back to the writing piece of it. The arts has really intellectual energy, so the reading side of it. And this is me posing, hoping that Vogue is going to take a picture of me, you know, like posing by my bookshelf. But really, the bookshelf is like a feature in our house. Again, Radhika and I worked a lot on it, and so it's a big part of the books and the reading. I mean, you cannot be a writer if you don't read. I'm actually a much slower reader than people might think, or that, you know, others might assume. But it's without reading, there's no writing. Then the arts is work life. So there's this, all the writing I do for the Mint, which the day job still continues. So I've had this book out, and then I had my 100th column out recently. And this, I really want to, you know, I want to give a standing ovation to practically, really, is really this stabilizing partnership. And this is a quote by Radhika, can you just please stand up for a minute, Radhika? Okay. She gets this because, you know, she is the first you. Your first mind is your creative mind, and your second mind is your management mind. And when you have been repeatedly told your mind is splintered, she offered me redemption. So I think that was just the most amazing thing. I have, you know, doing up a house, and particularly with respect to IE, but having your in-laws move in with the most stressful thing for most women, yeah. But because I was working with Radhika, we did this amazing place, and 8 years ago, and every time I do a project with her, it's like, it's not even a question for me to do a project and not have her involved in it, you know. But it really kept me sane, because not only do we do the project, but we talk about so much stuff around life, creativity, books, reading, general, which are conversations that we don't have. So I've noticed that actually when we're working together, I remain a lot more stable. Yeah, the pictures of our home, and a very bad old picture of us, the only one she let me put up. And not to feel left out to the others. The arts and design as really, again, sacred. I would use people say safe spaces, but I go beyond that to say it's sacred. It's really sacred, and it's nourishing. And Upasna also, who deserves a big standing applause. Upasna, please stand up. She has seen this book all the way through. And, you know, when I handed in my manuscript, you know, we said, let's do our thing and get a coffee. And I went to the bathroom, and then she came out, and before, there's this little note for me saying, congratulations, Aparna, you handed in your manuscript. It was there at Soho House. So she's been, you know, Soho House is where I love to write, and she's been a huge part of that journey. And of course, also the book club. A very favorite story from book club is that I went to, you know, so not everybody in my journey has been encouraging of my writing, especially one of my doctors. And he actually told me that, you know, you're so good at planning the children's holidays, you should do that, and your husband is so busy, and he's got such a busy schedule, and you shouldn't be writing about mental health. And this is the guy who's handing me my medication, which I need, you know, to remain stable. And I got so upset that day that I formed a WhatsApp group called Bipolar Girl Power, and a few of my book club friends were on it. And Lena, who's also in the audience, was really helpful. And since we're all liberal and there are no, you know, under 13s here, so she sent me this. She said that I think you should show your domestic skills to the doctor. And I said, okay, how should I do that? She said, okay, you should bake him a cake like this. Okay, so I said, what's on the cake? The cake basically has a picture of a vagina and says, fuck the patriarch. And you know, so that story has not made its way to the book, but, but you know, really this is the support you need. You know, people ask, how can I support a person who's, you know, unwell or whatever, but these are the ways that we support them. And last but not least at all, Sonia who's here and all my writers club who have trekked from God knows where, they need a award for just coming all the way. They've seen this book. If it was not for Sonia and her deadlines, like we meet every month, Aparna, every month I want to see a chapter. So that's how the book gets written. So the arts have been my companion, definitely through my mood swings. But more than that, they have been my mirror, and they've helped me find a voice and identity and channel my energies. And this has been just the snapshot of what we've seen. I'll read a little bit of my own poetry. I'm not very good at necessarily reading it, but I'll try. Aquarius, because that's my star sign, it's about water, and just it compares the ocean to my mind. Aquarius, a shoal of fish shimmers, a wave of gentle emotion. Sharks glide, menacing and toothy, stabs of rage and frustration. Be still, my raging mind. The angry storm is not the only drumbeat. The constant tide has rhythm too. Gaze at that distant horizon, touch those stranger shores, stillness and movement in alternate breaths. Deep sea divers watch their oxygen, searching for sparkle in dark waters, sifting treasure from insoluble residue. Moon and sun observe in rotations, orchestrating highs and lows under a sheltering sky. But only the wind rubs boundaries with the ocean, an invisible companion whispering shared songs in parallel journeys across the globe. So what that really says is that, you know, the ocean is like the mind, and there are these sharks and these fish and these different emotions, and you have these highs and lows like the tides, and you have these different moods. But this poem was written as far back as 2004, and it says the wind actually refers to the writing, which basically says that only the wind understands the ocean, no one else, not even a person. And you know, all of us have this idea of sadhana, that we do some kind of sadhana, whether it's music, whether it's yoga, whether it's some kind of practice that we do, whether it's gardening, whatever it is, we have some sadhana in our life, and that's what writing is. So, you know, that was, I think, somewhere down the line, as far back as 2004, I recognized that, but I had probably not internalized it. So the couple of questions I want to ask, and you know, we have a lovely group here where we can definitely be as open as possible. Is it bipolarity that drew me to the arts, or was it arts that helped me manage my bipolarity? One question. How can creativity be balanced? And really the question is, why was it not prescribed? You know, because literally, like, I've had such differences between my help, medical help in the UK and my medical help in India. So like, for example, in India, like I told you one story already, but if I take a poem to a therapist here, one of them said, oh, are you tormented by this? And she actually used the word tormented, you know, which is such a judgment-laden word. Somebody else said, I sent the same poem to someone else, and she said, are you still bothered by this? Whereas I sent the poem to somebody in the UK, and she's like, okay, I learned something about you. How do you feel about writing this? Why have you shared this with me? You know, you've told me something about someone through this poem, and why is it, you know, why are you still, why is that still bothering you? And we had a whole discussion on what, like, trauma was, for example. Or for example, in therapy, if I share a poem, and I do a lot, she says that if there are times when I break down, she'll ask me, why did you break down? Or I'll give you a minute to collect yourself. Then she'll ask you, which word was it that actually got you to be moved? She didn't even use the word breakdown. She'll say, which word was the one that moved you? So there's a real ability for them to understand what I'm saying. Even with I've had this new therapist only recently, but even I did have a psychiatrist in the UK for a long time, but I used to only see him once or twice a year. So he was actually very good at understanding it. But here, I've just not had, the average person that I've met has just not been able to understand this. And it's been a big part of the healing. I mean, I'm glad I've done it organically, but I just trying to think of all these people who have not maybe had the benefits of, meeting the Radhikas and the Leenas and the Upasnas and the Sonyas and the other people who've been with me on this journey. So that, I think that's the thought I would love to leave you with, and would open it up to questions. Thank you.
I just wanted this to be also a forum for a speakeasy, and since the show is also kind of speaking about coming out, if there is somebody who wants to share something, this is like an open mic, and we welcome you to come and, if there is something that you'd like to share as well.
It's amazing that you've written this memoir. I wanted to ask you, was it difficult, to share so much? And can you recall when you decided, at what point, that you would write all of this down and share it?
Actually, I wanted to write it back in 2014. So I got officially diagnosed, although we've been having problems for a long time, but my official diagnosis was in 2013. That's when I started medication. And so in 2014, after that, like 18 months or so, I wrote a note called 10 Things I've Learned About Being Bipolar. And I just shared that with friends and family, and they were very encouraging, and they said that you should, do more of this. And in fact, it was our book club. I think Leena was there at that time. We had a session where we read somebody else's memoir, and we read this. And they all said, you must do more of this. So, but every time I wanted to write those, I kept having mood swings, and I just wasn't detached from the material at that time. Then the lockdown actually was really good for me. It gave me a lot of purpose, it gave me a lot of discipline. And the Writers Club, which you've been obviously heading, really gave me that discipline of just saying, start looking at it as an act of labor, and not so much necessarily an act of emotion. Of just being able to write it down and put in the hours and meet the deadlines and do all of it. In terms of the only time I think I felt really emotional writing it was when we put in some quotes from my journal, and my editor asked me, can you go back to your journal and give me a few more quotes? And then I started reading the whole journal, and that's almost a book in itself. And it's always a very depressive place because I only write in the depressive journal when I'm depressed. So then I thought, oh my God, I've been through so much depression over the years. And I actually incapacitated me pretty much for the weekend. I mean, Radhika was visiting, and I just couldn't even get out of bed to say bye to her when she left for London. So that was the time. But the writing of it was, more of there was a lot of interviewing involved. I interviewed about 75 people for the book. So recording the interviews, writing it didn't feel very different from the writing that I do for the Mint. And a lot of the emotion is in the poetry. So the poems were already written. So it didn't feel very different also, because it's still non-fiction. So it's not completely like writing fiction, which will hopefully be the next endeavor.
Aparna, could you tell us a little bit, what does it mean to have a manic episode? Do you remember what's happening? Like, how would it be to somebody who hasn't really experienced it?
Yeah, so I actually have a pretty decent memory of what was going on inside my head. I don't have a good memory of what I might have said to someone, but I have a good memory of what was going on inside my head. So just a lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas, but at an extreme level. I think many of us will go through a phase. Many of us are creative people in this room. We have a lot of ideas and thoughts and emotions, but just at the level where they're just becoming a little bit more bizarre. Maybe there's paranoia in there, maybe there's trauma in there. So there is all of that, and it's just not in your control. And and you want to respond to everything. You're very impulsive. Your big thing is that you're losing sleep. Really losing sleep, and you've got a lot of energy. So I like to think that all of us are on a spectrum at some level, and it's just that some days I might be on the more extreme level of the spectrum, and just because someone is bipolar, that is not bipolar, doesn't mean that they don't have mood swings. They probably will have mood swings, but they may not be as extreme. And yeah, when there are voices in the head and delusions and hallucinations which have also happened, then you're going closer to psychosis, which can be very scary.
So I'm curious about the cover of the book. I find it very intriguing. The repeated use of the color red as well as the abstract figures. Is there any symbolism to that?
Yeah, I thought that the red is really, you'd be best placed to ask a designer, Akanksha, who did it. But I think for me, what it symbolizes, the red really symbolizes the intensity of the moods and the energies. And I think, I don't know, how do you interpret it? Like, what did it mean to you?
To me, it meant a lot of variations. When you talk about bipolar, as you mentioned, there are a lot of mood swings. So there is not one static state of the mind. So it just, to me, it just meant an extreme state of mind, a very different and unique state of mind. That is what the figures represented to me.
Yeah, just exactly that diversity, and also to some extent, like I think the work in the gallery shows that there are patterns also. You know, that you can kind of see some patterns in it, and that it's an abstraction. We are very keen to avoid like the typical picture of the brain, and a lot of mental health work, graphic design is very cutesy also, like very comforting and very empathetic, and we wanted to avoid those. We did have a few of those covers, and it took a lot to try and stall them.
I think as young people who are trying to get into the mental health field, because both of us are psychology kids, I just wanted to know, as someone who's experienced therapy in India, what would you change about it? Or what would you ask us to do differently?
Yeah, the therapist has to be there for the person and not their family. Single thing, if you can change that. You know, the therapist has to say, I am concerned about you, I'm not concerned right now about your family. If they want therapy, they can go somewhere else.
I've heard somewhere, I read it somewhere that depression ignites inspiration. Do you think so?
I haven't been able to write anything when I'm depressed, unfortunately. Except all these horrible like lines of I'm so depressed, I'm so overweight, I put on so much weight, that kind of thing.
But is it your writing, you started after depression or after,
I think a lot of my very good writing has happened when I'm manic. That's a problem. I don't like to throw it away.
I just wanted to first say what a beautiful exhibition it is, so congratulations to Sunena and all the artists. And lovely presentation, Aparna, of course. I have a similar question to yours actually, for Aparna and any of the artists really. I think a lot of people believe, and I think there is some truth to the fact that any mental health condition can untap creativity. So, you know, some of the best artists, writers, poets have had some kind of mental health condition. And by the same token, you know, as you've set out, it's actually the arts that could channel their sort of mental health condition in a creative, kind of calming, stabilizing way. So I'd love to hear from you or maybe any of the other artists who are here in terms of, you know, whether either having a mental health condition or caring for someone, how that has impacted their creativity.
Would anybody like to speak? Any of the artists? So I think that what I've realized and what also works there in the book is that, you know, I think I did probably associate creativity with being on a high because it was much easier to write. And so I'm not the only one, I think there are lots of people like this. It's much easier to write when you are a bit manic and hypomanic. But also what you realize is that it is very dangerous territory and you start going down a road that is difficult. And also, I think when you can, you have still more control over what you're doing and you have a little bit more purpose and you're a little bit more mindful, then you can actually produce good work. So a good example for me was actually recently, you know, when the second wave happened, I hadn't written a poem in 3 years and I was like wondering, am I ever going to do that again? But then the second wave happened and it was such an emotional time for everyone. And as it happened, my in-laws got COVID and my husband was quarantining himself. I was alone with the kids, my staff was somewhere else. So, you know, I was sort of looking after myself after a long time. And I was just finding that I was writing poetry, but I was not completely losing it, you know. So I think that if I can do that without losing it, that's the really fine balance that one needs to find, you know, that needs to locate. And I think you only sort of get it over time, I think. I don't know, we have lots of creative people in this room. Maybe they can share how they create work. Radhika, you want to say anything?
So I had a question.
Yeah.
When you do write something when you in that manic episode, when you come out of that episode, like how do you relate? Always relate back to what you wrote, or do you sometimes like not relate, or like how does it
usually
feel
go
for
back
you
to
after
it
that?
actually.
Okay.
I just know that I can do it. Like sometimes if it's, usually when I'm really manic or hypomanic, I don't usually go back to it. I usually delete everything. Some things I want to keep, so it's difficult. Sometimes there's actually been a couple of works, just to qualify, a couple of works that I wrote where I was almost afraid to go back to them, and then a friend of mine said, okay, let's read it and see what you actually wrote. And I found a voice that was totally different, that was just playful and funny and, just light-hearted and irreverent. And I said, that's who I want to be. Can I just have that emotion without going through the mania? Do I have to be manic and write 40 pages? Or can I just write it without being? So I think it's important to try and, sometimes it's a good reference, but usually most of the time I think a lot of it is quite junk.
Not a question, it's just a comment. And I think it's just so wonderful seeing your presentation and hearing everything and seeing all of this art today. As a mental health therapist, I feel the comparison you made about the two types of therapy you've received. It's so important to have agency in this space, and just you standing up there with that book and with this language, it's power to the letters you write instead of the letters by your name. So amazing. And I think this is important for people who read it, who see it, that you can be a woman, you can be brown, and you can talk about these topics.
Yeah, I mean, I would really love you to spread the word, because I don't want this to be a book about bipolar. I would not want this book to be about mental health. This book is about resilience, and vulnerability. And I think all of us have that in the lives, especially when we're 40 plus, So I think we have that. So I think that a lot of people have been saying this is an act of courage, but it's an act of resilience more than an act of courage, because it is so normalized in my head now, and also my family is so normalized for all of us that we don't think of it as something, terribly courageous in that way. So, but yeah.
So Aparna, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. And I have a personal anecdote. When I went to Cornell, my housemate, who I didn't know at that time, was bipolar. And it was kind of quite extraordinary to be around her. And every day I woke up, the furniture had changed in the home. So I she kind of left notes, all over the house. And so it's a condition that does need help, and I'm really kind of still in awe that you decided to write a book. I know that you have amazing support, which is wonderful. But the fact is, this is what needs to be done. We need to speak about things and not shy away and feel overwhelmed or what people are going to think about us. And I'm so glad that you've come, and it couldn't be a better context. In the context I want tomorrow. Something that situates hope and the fact that we want to be better and there will be a positive tomorrow for everybody. So with that, thank you. And a couple of other thanks are in order. I'd love to firstly thank the artist for being a part of my very beautiful exhibition and this long journey. To Sunaina Kejriwal for your kind invitation, to use your gallery. Thank you. To Sandeep and Bianca, who are the backbone of putting this exhibition and alongside with me, and also to all the staff. And to all of you for coming today and making this such an important evening that we would remember. So thank you once again.
I really want to thank Sunaina, and I told her continuing this very dangerous tradition of Bajaj families hosting Piramal book launches, because my mother had a book launch hosted by the just last month, and in fact my books are not available, but her book is available if you want to find out more about Sunaina's. So much, and to your team and Bianca for this.
The book launch is happening over there and by Mrs. Piramal. So she knew Mr. Rahul Bajaj and it's a very beautiful book and we just like you to actually take a look at it. So